Yeah, welcome back to Morning Joe. It's Thursday, June 11th. Jonathan Lemire, Katty Kay are still with us, and joining the conversation we have, former White House Communications Director to President Obama, Jen Palmieri, staff writer at The Atlantic, Frank Foer, senior writer at The Dispatch, and columnist at Bloomberg Opinion, David Drucker is with us. Good to have you all on this hour as we embark on the second hour of Morning Joe. President Trump continues to blame higher costs for Americans on the war in Iran, claiming the economic pain is only temporary. New data released yesterday shows inflation is outpacing workers' wages, rising to 4.2% over the last year, the highest level since April of 2023. The president gave a surprising answer when asked about that report.
Are you concerned, Mr. President, about the latest inflation number which came out this morning? Could that be a
No, I love it. The numbers were great. You know what I really love? I love the inflation. You know why? Because as soon as this war is over, you know, I can say it now. Something you didn't know. Do you know we've been taking out millions of barrels of oil? Nobody knows it. You know who doesn't know about it? Iran, until right now.
Inflation to come down between now.
Oh, when the war is over?
Yes.
It's coming down.
I know you can't.
It's going to come down like a rock.
You know, David Drucker, we explained that a politician saying, I love the inflation would be much like Keith Richards after being busted in Toronto for heroin saying in front of the judge, I love the cocaine. You just don't do it. And it's been bad enough with Donald Trump calling affordability BS, the affordability crisis a hoax. And of course, the numbers show. I mean, the president's in the low 20s when it comes to handling of inflation, when, you know, mid-high 20s when it comes to handling of the economy, some of the lowest numbers we've ever seen. And yet he keeps saying things like this. Give us some insight into Republicans. I know they had a caucus meeting last week, very discouraged by some of the numbers they saw. Talk about where they are and what they're expecting this fall.
Yeah, well, they're concerned that even though they've got a Senate map that's chock full of red states and just one blue state, that they're in for a world of hurt. They remain concerned about the House, even though the House majority is now effectively something like 14 seats. I think we have to look at the battle for the House of Representatives a little bit differently than we had until recently. But look, I think the problem with the president is that, one, he doesn't focus relentlessly on the economy and people's economic pain. It's something he's very good at doing as a candidate for president when he's the challenger. Mm-hmm. He's not good at doing these things when he's the incumbent. This is just like the coronavirus pandemic. What pandemic? This thing's over. Why are we wearing masks? Don't pay attention. It's all fake news. The problem is that when you don't meet voters where they are, it's a big problem. But, you know, it's like the president's trying to sell us a condo and you see cracks in the foundation and he's telling you it gives a character. Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. Because I think he likes to create the reality that he wants. And congressional Republicans, you know, publicly will have to talk very optimistically. But look, I've been looking at numbers since the beginning of the year. They know that it is a rough cycle. Many of them have been through this before on both ends of it. And the battle that they're having, and sometimes there's just nothing you can do about this, guys, and you know that. The battle they're having is that the party's biggest megaphone is not on the same page as them in trying to focus on what the voters want them to focus on. And then, you know, then voters will judge whether or not you're actually doing a good job. But if you don't even focus on it, it's like you're cutting yourself off at the knees and not giving yourself a fighting chance.
Jen, if you're working on a rival campaign, a Democratic campaign this fall, and you keep getting these gifts from the President of the United States, a couple of weeks ago he said, I don't think about Americans' financial situations. Yesterday he says, I love the inflation, which is crippling families across the country, from gas to groceries all over the place. Mm-hmm. Should that just be the Democrats' message? This is an administration, this is a party that just does not care about your well-being and your financial situation, as the president
put it. Yeah, I mean, that's the backdrop, right? That's the backdrop to everything. But then I think that you do need, because people are, you know, voters are very turned off by Trump. The working class voters have lost faith in him. That opens up a lot of opportunity. But it also means that, I mean, I'm very aware that voters are very disillusioned, and that means the bar for credibility for candidates is even higher in terms of what you are going to do. So it is. I mean, it's just beyond devastating for Republicans to say, "I love inflation." I mean, the only thing that I think is good about this is he just must be focused on his legacy, right? He wants to build monuments to himself. Nothing. There can be no bad news because that's bad for his legacy. It suggests that he's moving on, but it is I haven't seen a situation that's more devastating for a president, tanking his party.
I know us Washingtonians are all worried now what's going to happen next, because the reflecting pool is full of water again. So what's he moving on to next time around? Are we actually going to start seeing that arch? But Frank, when the president says that, okay, what he was trying to say is the inflation numbers are going to come down because the Straits of Hormuz are going to get back open again. But actually what we're seeing is a resumption of fighting overnight, it looks like, and oil prices have spiked a little bit again because of that. What point do voters lock in their views of the economy, and how much, what's the time frame? Because I'm hearing different things, that by June, basically, it's done. You've decided how you feel about the economy. Not much can change your mind between June and November. How much longer do you think the Republicans have to try to turn these numbers around?
I'm not sure exactly when voters cross that threshold. I mean, I know there's a lot of folk wisdom about that, but it feels like the fundamental problem is the one that you pointed out, which is that the inflation story is tethered to the war in Iran. And to borrow Charles Barkley's line, I mean, this is like the dumbest history the dumbest basketball in history that he's playing here, that he's stuck. He still doesn't have any sense of how he's going to get out of this war. And so, there are no reliable narrators of the negotiations, but it seems like he had to revert to these strikes because the negotiations were going nowhere. And if the negotiations are going nowhere and he has no other plan for changing the dynamics of the conflict, inflation's just going to remain stuck where it is.
Yeah, after the Democrats had their devastating loss in 2024 and nobody immediately following knew what had happened, and thank God they did an after-action report and that made sense. Oh wait, no, that actually was chaotic. But I went down to Little Rock and I talked to President Bill Clinton on the celebration, I believe, of his 20th anniversary of the Presidential Library being opened up. And I asked him, I said, what happened? And he said, Democrats didn't meet voters where they were. They got defined as being focused on issues that 99% of Americans aren't obsessed with. And he didn't say it, but, you could talk about the trans issue. You could talk about other issues that maybe some of the more progressive elements of the Democratic Party supported that Republicans defined. But Bill Clinton said that they have to focus on where Americans are. And that's the economy, going all the way back to James Carville. It's the economy, stupid. But think about this. Jonathan Lemire, in 2025, as Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan said yesterday, summer 2025, presidents seem to be at the peak of his powers, but the peak of any presidential power really is in quite some time, going over constitutional boundaries, running roughshod over the law, but he virtually seemed unstoppable. That all changed going into the fall with the Epstein files and continued. But think about 2026. When you're supposed to meet voters where they are, let's just really quickly, because it's been an extraordinarily chaotic year in American culture and politics. What's happened in 2026? Minneapolis, Venezuela, Cuba, Greenland again, the Iran war, China, the reflecting pool obsession, the Grand Arch obsession, tearing down the East Wing and the Marie Antoinette Ballroom. 2026 has been the president moving from one, and I think David's right. I think he's looking at his legacy and not looking at the midterms. But the president is nowhere near where the American people are, and that's always, as David said, I thought he was brilliant during the campaigns. He gets it. He knows. He knows what itch to scratch for voters. It couldn't be further from where voters are in 2026 than any politician I've seen in a very long time. When you're looking, again, Minneapolis, wars all over the globe, talking about invading Greenland, talking about invading Cuba, talking about reflecting pools, talking about the Kennedy Center, we could go on and on and on. Nothing about the economy that really connects with voters.
Yeah, I wrote a few months ago about the bubble he's in. All presidents exist in some sort of bubble, but this one in particular, it's an echo chamber. He only talks to people who agree with him. He does no domestic travel anymore, none. And to David's point, that is where he would go out on the road. He'd go to these rallies. He'd see what lines would work or what not, and that would give him a sense as to what the American people, or at least his voters, cared about. That's stopped. Instead, he's being fed AI slop on Truth Social. That's the only feedback he's getting from, quote, real people. And he is completely out of touch. I mean, yesterday, him blurting out, I love the inflation, it's like Brick and Anchorman yelling, I love lamp, because he didn't know what else to say. I mean, it was that nonsensical, and it will be featured in every possible campaign ad this fall. And I think the point here is right. That it's not just disconnect from voters, it's also disconnect from where Republicans need him to be. They need him to be talking about the economy. They need him to at least pretend to care what people are thinking and feeling about. And instead, he's consumed with foreign adventures, and he's consumed, Joe, with indeed his legacy and remaking Washington in his own image. He cares about how he'll be remembered forever, and he's losing sight of what got him back to the office in the first place.
Yeah, Brick, are you saying you love inflation because you're looking at an inflation chart? That's basically where we were yesterday. But talking about how isolated he was yesterday, I think everybody was shocked but not surprised at Maggie and Jonathan's piece where they talked about how insulated the president was, how isolated he was from the Epstein files, that everybody else in the White House that mattered would go in and hide in the Situation Room. That's where crazy. You usually chart out, raids of Osama bin Laden and the beginning of wars. Instead, they were talking all summer, trying to figure out, without the president really being in there, trying to figure out how to handle this growing crisis that Dan Bongino said was going to be Donald Trump's Iran-Contra. And the thing that ran through that entire piece was nobody could talk to the president about what could be the biggest crisis in his presidency. He's completely isolated, even inside the White House, according to this report.
And I guess there's just a little bit of Republican pushback. And David, your latest opinion piece for Bloomberg is titled "The GOP's YOLO Caucus is Peak Government." In it, you write in part this: freed from the president's political yoke, Senator Tom Tillis, because he opted against running for re-election, and Senator Bill Cassidy, because he lost his primary to a Trump-endorsed opponent, have suddenly taken to wielding Congress's constitutional power. North Carolina's Tillis almost single-handedly forced the Trump administration to abandon a bogus investigation of then Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. And Louisiana's Cassidy joined his colleague in opposing White House priorities the instant he delivered his concession speech on May 16th. He voted with Democrats for the first time to limit Trump's war-making powers in Iran. The pushback against the leader of the Republican Party has struck observers as so unusual that Tillis and Cassidy have been labeled the so-called YOLO caucus, as in you only live, or lose in this case, once. The term is used to describe a state of mind in which a person feels he or she has nothing left to lose. But the two senators aren't going skydiving, Rocky Mountain climbing, or riding a bull named Fu Manchu. Hat tip to Tim McGraw there. They're simply doing the job they were elected to do per standard procedure in the user's manual.
Okay, David Drucker, first of all, let me just say, you get 100 bonus points for quoting "Live Like You Were Dying." Just an incredible song. But talk about that, and then you add on top of that Mitch McConnell and, of course, now Susan Collins, because she's got a very competitive race up in Maine.
Yes, she does.
And on top of that, John Cornyn, who lost to Ken Paxton, I guess, has inflamed a lot of Republican senators. A lot of stuff adding up right now, making John Thune's job much harder.
Yeah, look, what struck me about the attention that Tillis and Cassidy in particular have gotten, Cornyn has made a point of saying he's not joined the YOLO caucus. Others, have already been there to some degree. Was that I think we all forget in this country that we don't have three co-equal branches of government, that the Article I legislative branch is supposed to be the supreme branch. It's what the founders intended. It's the way they designed this whole thing. And what we've seen over the last 25 years in particular is a slow degradation of Congress exercising its power. And we've seen members of Congress of both parties willingly abdicate their authority as long as the guy in the White House is their guy. And so all of a sudden, you see Tillis, Cassidy, and occasionally a couple of others. We're seeing it with these discharge positions in the House, where a few Republicans get together, join with Democrats to work the will of the chamber, actually exercise authority and say no to the president. And I'm more impressed not necessarily with what they're saying no to, whether they're saying yes or no, but just that they're saying, wait, we have this power and we're using it. And when you look at the rise in power and influence lately of the Supreme Court, the judiciary, you look at the rise of the executive branch, particularly under Trump this past couple of years, but this was going on under Joe Biden and Barack Obama. I have a pen and a phone. I'm going to use it. It's all been because Congress has sat on its hands and done nothing. And the system doesn't work the way it was intended. Our politics gets dysfunctional when one of our branches, the one that is actually supposed to be the most important, doesn't show up for work.
I mean, as David points out, Jen, many of the leaders of this caucus found their courage when they're leaving town. Tom Tillis, John Cornyn, Bill Cassidy have all been run out of office or are retiring, and those are the loudest voices. But you still, even yesterday, Speaker Johnson was asked about the "I love inflation" comment. He goes, "Oh, you guys are taking it out of context," and they have to run in behind him and sweep up and provide a new interpretation of what the president says. Point being, we have these sort of bursts of opposition to President Trump, but generally speaking, Republicans are not going to defy him.
The courage too late is like the epitaph for the Trump era. But I still think it matters. You know, when you hear like Cassidy and Tillis, words matter. People respond to leadership. It does have an impact. It has an impact in their states. There is one Republican who has consistently called out Trump, continues to vote her conscience. It's Lisa Murkowski. She's great in Alaska, right? If you're consistent and you do stand on some kind of principle, people hear that and they listen to it. And it is different this year from Alex Preddy on. We have it ebbs and flows, but it's never consistent. It never stays. But it's too late, but I still welcome it.
Senior writer at the Dispatch and columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, David Drucker, thank you very much for coming on again this morning. And still ahead on Morning Joe.
Major gauge of inflation rose to 4.2% last month. That's the highest it's been since April of 2023. That comes as the Federal Reserve is set to meet next week for the first time since the new chair, Kevin Warsh, was confirmed. Now investors will be keeping a close eye on the meeting to see what the Fed will do after those latest numbers and what it'll mean for interest rates. Let's bring in former Treasury official, Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner. Steve, you're not at the wall with charts, and that makes us sad, but we're happy to have you at the table. Happy to have you at the table nevertheless.
I'm happy to be closer to you guys.
That's true. We'll take it. So can you explain just the distinction here, if there is one, consumer price index, inflation, what that report yesterday means?
Yeah, well, consumer price index is inflation. It's our measure of inflation. And what the report means is that the costs of this war are still coming through to American consumers. You have inflation, as you said, at the highest since 2023. Year over year, it's over 4%. We were supposed to be getting back to 2%. Obviously, gas prices are a big driver of that. But even beyond that, other prices have moved up as well. And so this is all tough. This is tough for consumers and of course, tough for the president politically, which is a large part of why he's so desperate to get this war over with.
Yeah, the president saying yesterday, "I love the inflation," came in the context of his saying, "I love the inflation because once I end this war," which, as we've been talking about this morning, there's no end in sight at the moment, it's going to come crashing down. Everything will be back to where it was. How do you assess that analysis?
The president has a unique relationship with numbers and facts. and
very generous.
I love that.
Yeah.
So diplomatic.
That was kind.
And things like that. And I guess the bright side of it is inflation probably will come down a bit when this is over. But one of the many things to worry about here is consumers' expectations of inflation, because what consumers expect to have inflation in some ways is as important as what actually happens, because it then drives future inflation, what we call expectations. And expectations have been ticking up.
So we have some charts, even though you're not at the wall. We'll take them here at the table. Chart 1, inflation overtaking wages. You just touched on that. What are we looking at in these numbers?
So obviously the key question for consumers is what happens to wages when inflation occurs. And you can see the top line there shows wage increases, which actually have been trending down a bit, but we're contrary to probably many popular impressions, running above inflation, and therefore people actually were slightly better on average. We had the K-shaped recovery, we had people at the bottom doing worse. But then you see those lines cross in the last few months. And what those lines crossing in the last few months says is that consumers are now running behind inflation, and they're losing purchasing power every month. Obviously, gas prices, everybody's well aware of, but other things are going up as well. And so as the president gets into the midterms and faces the ballot box in November, this is not the scenario in which you want to go into it. You guys talk a lot about Jimmy Carter and the hostage crisis and so forth, and the hostages were obviously a big impact on the 1980 election, but so was the 15% inflation that occurred in 1980. We're not going to have 15% inflation or anything like it, but I also don't think consumers are going to be as patient with inflation as they might have been back in 1980.
Joe?
Well, you're exactly right, Steve. Just for younger viewers, 6, 7, 8% inflation, often throughout the 70s and 80s were seen as,
Oh, his IFB's not working.
It's terrible. So, Willie, inflation at 7 and 8% during the 70s and 80s wasn't seen as radical. It certainly is now. You've got a generation of workers that aren't used to high inflation. So as this inflation bumps up to 4%, even if it drags down to 3.5% by the election, Steve, that's still a problem for consumers. You have, of course, we've had some of the lowest consumer confidence ratings in the history of that survey. You look at market valuations, a lot of banks think market valuations are at an all-time high and overly inflated. And then we have a $39 trillion debt. There are a lot of pressures weighing down on this economy, a lot of long-term pressures. And inflation on top of that seems to me just a very toxic mix for working Americans.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Joe. I don't think Americans have the same patience for inflation they might have had in the late 70s or the early 80s. Because they go into this inflation in a fairly weak position. We all know that the pressure of housing prices and other costs, the so-called affordability crisis, it is an affordability crisis, really weighs on them. And then on top of that, we're now facing the prospect of potentially higher interest rates. The Fed, as Willie mentioned, is going to have its first meeting under Kevin Warsh next week. And what's happening there, and if we can maybe go to that other chart that I brought, what's happening there is that people's expectations of interest rates, the market's expectations of interest rates, has deteriorated. What this shows, the line across the middle, is where the Fed's interest rate is at the moment. You go back to January, and everybody's expecting substantial rate cuts. And this is another issue, of course, with the president, who thinks interest rates are already way too high. Well, what the chart shows is that the market thinks interest rates, if you look all the way to the right, are actually going to be higher at the end of this year than they are now, so that the Fed, in fact, instead of cutting rates, which is what everybody expected, what the president's been beating the drum about, what he thought he put Kevin Warsh at the Fed to do, it's now very possible interest rates will go up. And of course, that means higher mortgage rates, which are already moving up a bit, and other kinds of higher costs for consumers on their credit. So this is all potentially very bad news for the president politically. This is not the backdrop in which you want to go into an election with the possibility of rates going up, and certainly not of rates going down anytime in the future. And it'll be interesting to watch the relationship between Warsh and the president as the Fed deals with the reality and the president deals in his own parallel universe about what he thinks the economy is doing and what the Fed should do.
Steve, presumably the president will give Warsh a little bit of slack. He fought to get him in there. He's put him in, so he's going to allow him, a little bit of rate increases, I imagine. Well, I just don't understand the economy at the moment. I don't understand why the stock market is booming. I don't understand why oil prices haven't gone up further than they're going. This bifurcation, it seems that we seem to be seeing in the American economy. How long can that last for? How long can we be in this situation where we know that things are not getting better that much quicker in the Gulf? We'd been told that oil gas prices might go up to 150, 200, and yet somehow the investors are just assuming the president is right when he says it's going to work out and it's all going to be fixed soon?
No, and this is also part of the president's political problem and part of what's really dividing our country at the moment, which is you do have companies doing exceptionally well. Corporate profits are unbelievably strong.
The AI boom.
A lot of it's the AI boom, and it filters through because when you build data centers in Phoenix, you have to hire construction companies, and they make money, and all the suppliers of the parts make money, and so on and so forth. And so the stock market is operating in its own parallel universe, which is to say that it looks at the corporate sector, and things are going pretty well. We're going to have the SpaceX IPO tomorrow on Friday. Mm-hmm. It's the largest IPO in history. It's going to be an unbelievable event. It's probably going to trade up substantially. And a lot of people are going to make a lot of money, except for all the people who really need the money, which are the people who are facing the gas prices and the higher costs of everything that they buy.
And Jen, let's look at this through a political lens. I mean, it's inflation. Yes, it's up for everybody. But that, to me, is the key here, is this. We have this stratification where the very richest are doing great. Like, those people are benefiting from President Trump's policies and seemingly only going to get better from here, while the rest of the country lags far behind. That seems to be the political message, not just for 26, but if I'm a potential Democratic hopeful in 2028, I start right there. That is like, this is a country that's leaving too many people behind.
And I think it's going to require some really innovative thinking and pretty bold solutions. The last 10 years in the sort of MAGA world have been about tearing down laws and regulations and ways of life from the previous 50 years. Like, really innovative thinking is going to have to happen to find a way to get to deal with that inequality, because it's not going to, that's not going to change between 26 and 28.
Jen Palmieri, Steve Ratner, thank you both. Always good to see you. Coming up, turns out there is another sporting event happening in America other than the NBA Finals we've been talking about all morning. The World Cup kicks off this afternoon.
The new Netflix show titled The Rest is Football. It's set to stream in conjunction with the FIFA World Cup, which kicks off this afternoon in Mexico City, and it's hosted by pro soccer greats Gary Lineker, Alan Shearer, and Mika Richards, who will bring fans daily match analysis along with some great banter over the course of the tournament. And Gary joins us now, a former captain for England's national team. He also earned the Golden Boot the last time the World Cup games were played in Mexico as a top scorer of the 1986 tournament. Gary, thanks so much for being with us, and congratulations, I've got to say, on everything that you've done. Your podcast company is a worldwide success. We were telling Caddy earlier in the show that somebody came up to me on the street from Australia saying, "Do you know Caddy K? Oh my God, you listen to The Rest is Politics all the time." So, but just congratulations on that great success, and tell us what we should look forward to starting today with a World Cup that's going to be, in many ways, unfortunately, unlike any others.
Yeah, I think mixed emotions going into the first day. I think we're all excited for the football. I've covered a lot of World Cups and I've played in a couple as well, but there is a slight difference with this one. Albeit in all the World Cups that I've been to, there's always concerns prior to the World Cup. You know, you could go back to 2014 in Brazil and people were demonstrating on the streets because they were spending the money on stadiums rather than infrastructure and perhaps the health service. 2018. 4 years previously, Russia had invaded Crimea. So 2022, there were LGBTQ rights in Qatar and people had died making the stadium. So there is always something, but I don't think we've ever had a World Cup where, A, the host nation is at war with one of the competing nations. I don't think we've had one where we've had so many issues with getting people in. We've certainly not had one when one of FIFA's finest referees has not been allowed in the country. So normally, in World Cups, once it starts, we just focus on the football and it's all fun and it's all great. But with this one, I think we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, you know things are bad when actually Sepp Blatter is out there giving moral speeches on the direction of the World Cup. Let's talk about football here. And let me ask you, is this going to be a battle between probably France and Spain, or does England have a chance to do what it hasn't done since 1966?
Well, it'd be lovely to think so, as I'm English, obviously. So I think England's got a chance, there's no doubt about that. I don't think we're absolute favourites. I think you're quite right to say Spain and France are the favourites. France either go all the way or tend to implode. I think the latter may happen in this World Cup. We'll wait and see. I think Spain will take some beating and play beautiful football. There are conditions which are going to be difficult, I think, in this World Cup with heat and storms and the playing surfaces.
সময় কেন তাকালে চলে যাবার সে সময় কেন তাকালে মিষ্টি মুখে চোখের চাউনি আমাকে পাগল করেছে পাগল করেছে মেয়েটি আমাকে পাগল করেছে চলে যাবার সে সময় কেন তাকালে মাটিতে পা ফেলবে সে মাটির ধুলো হয়ে থাকবো গায়ে জড়িয়ে মাটিতে পা ফেলবে সে মাটির ধুলো হয়ে থাকবো গায়ে জড়িয়ে পাগল করেছে মেয়েটি আমাকে পাগল করেছে চলে যাবার সে সময় কেন তাকালে আকাশে উড়াল মেরেছে আদরের ময়না পাখি পাখি যাচ্ছে উড়ে আকাশে উড়াল মেরেছে আদরের ময়না পাখি পাখি যাচ্ছে উড়ে পাগল করেছে মেয়েটি আমাকে পাগল করেছে চলে যাবার সে সময় কেন তাকালে মিষ্টি মুখে চোখের চাউনি আমাকে পাগল করেছে পাগল করেছে মেয়েটি আমাকে পাগল করেছে চলে যাবার সে সময় কেন তাকালে চলে যাবার সে সময় কেন তাকালে